Hi guys, my name is Vanessa Toit. I'm a former Protea netball player and currently working full-time in the media industry.
Hi, I am Marisa Calvert. I am a media professional. I work in PR.
Yo, I'm Dane Piedt. I leave the house to buy alcohol and food during lockdown, but I do play cricket for a living. Former Protea and Chorus player, but now just signed a contract to play cricket in America.
Hey guys, Seabelo Senatla. I'm an athlete. If you have to break it down, I'm a rugby player for Stuart in the Blessed Park at the moment.
I'm Stuart, a presenter at Supersport.
I'm Kaunda Ntunja, rugby commentator in isiXhosa, and also a presenter as well at Supersport.
Hi, I'm Keagan Buchanan, professional footballer for Maritzburg United.
Hi, my name is Chulumanco driver. But when I'm not on Tiga Machiga, I happen to sing at Springbok and Proteas games with the Kujo squad.
So I think just to kick it off, how have you guys been adjusting career-wise as a result of COVID-19 and lockdown?
I think it's pretty difficult because obviously going team sports, you kind of used to that environment where you train with your peers. A lot of guys were complaining about training individually because it doesn't feel right, and obviously it's hard to push yourself when you're alone. More so for other people than others, but it's been a very difficult environment to be in because we kind of like used to people, so it's been quite challenging. But you've been tackling it by doing individual work and try to use technology as we're doing now to kind of get together and try to kind of simulate the same type of environment that we will be normally during training.
I think Sia brought up the topic from a physical aspect. It's very difficult to train by yourself, to get that motivation to want to get up every day and do what's necessary. But for me, I think the more important factor and where I put more my focus was on more the mental aspect. Being around your team and in that environment, it gets certain people through their day. And from people that I've interacted with, some of them are not doing too well from a mental perspective. But also from a financial point of view, it's scared a lot of people in terms of, is football, for example, the only thing that I'm doing? If this had to continue, what would I do? Some people haven't planned that far. So those are topics and discussions that some of us have. And it was interesting to see what people had to say. As a footballer, I just want to be blunt and say that, a lot of footballers are not open-minded to life after football as much as maybe a cricketer or a rugby player, for example, which is just the sad reality of what in our country. And I think now a lot of people are more open to, a pandemic can happen and it can affect you financially. And if you have kids or family or you provide for home, you need to be a step ahead and you need to look to something else just in case something like this happens, because we did not expect anything of this nature. And for certain guys who are maybe mismanaging their money monthly, it's very difficult for them. And they have it's kind of been a wake-up call. And this morning, for example, by the testing, a lot of guys were talking about it and saying that, hey, I need to look into something, a business or study. And that for me has actually been a positive from a footballer's perspective, to see that it's opened up people's mind and perspective of things could go very bad and you need to be ready for that.
No, it's spot on. I agree with the guys there about keeping fit. It's difficult to, especially in a team environment. We're not golfers and guys that play individual sports, but you rely a lot on your teammates to get through, especially in cricket. We travel a lot. We play different formats. So over like a 4-day game, we'll travel for about a week or 8 days and we're with one another, and that keeps you going at the end of the day. And life after sport, I definitely agree with Keagan there, where the environment that you find yourselves in, especially in cricket, discussions are had about investments and things like that, and something like this has happened, and you need to be prepared at the end of the day, but keeping fit, that's all I can do right now, and especially going to America, I want to be prepared because I'm going into the unknown, really. So I have a countries to choose to go further my cricket, but at the moment things are are looking a bit rough that side, but just trying to keep fit and trying to do as much as I can. Unfortunately, in cricket, we need the pitch to be prepared in order to own our skill, and that's not around at the moment. And especially being winter, it's kind of difficult. But those are the type of things that we face with at the moment, and all you can do is just try and grind through the tough times.
Kaunda and Julia, I think a question I want to pose to you guys, because obviously from a broadcasting point of view, the default, in times like this is the cool, let's kind of throw back all the great matches of the past and kind of air that. But what are some of the other impacts and kind of changes that from a broadcaster's point of view that you guys have had to endure in this time? I mean, obviously there's no live sport, but what are you guys up to over this period?
Abu, you've pretty much just slid over a key phrase there. There's no live sport. We don't have anything else that matters as much in our industry as live sport. So we have had to adjust. No sport. It's part of our culture. It's part of our routine. It's part of our identity, whether that be as fans, as players, as commentators, presenters, media, anyone involved. So the base product isn't there. There's nothing we can do. We cannot sell you updates about transfers. I mean, people are trying, but who's focused on that at the moment? So all we can talk around is how are people going to get ready for the live sport to resume? And in the meanwhile, from a TV perspective and a broadcasting perspective, it's shown us that we are not focusing enough on telling the stories off the pitch, off the field. We're not doing enough in terms of documentaries. We're not doing enough to tell our stories. And so that's made us rethink what we should be focusing on once the live sport does resume. There's a reason why The Last Dance was such a big hit worldwide. It told an incredible story. It came at an opportune time. They pushed up the release date because people were at home. Those kinds of documentaries, those kinds of stories we're not doing enough of in South Africa. We've also had to change the way in which we work. I've had to do links for a season review on my cell phone, which is very weird. You make a lot more mistakes because, the background isn't great. I know I've got shadows on here. The light's not great. You're talking to yourself. Your family's making noise. The dogs are barking. So that's all been an adjustment. And it's also been an adjustment in terms of what do you want to do during this period? I've started my own chats with people. I had hosted Keagan for one of them, mostly just to give kind of positivity and to get a look into sports people's lives and their personalities more, which again, I repeat, we're finding out now we're not doing enough of in South Africa. So that's been the one big lesson from my point of view.
Well, a lot of people are affected financially as well. Where we work at SuperSport, if you are a commentator or a presenter, you are either on a freelance contract, which is regardless of how many shifts you do, you get paid a set amount of money, or you get paid per shift. Luckily for me, I was on a freelance contract whereby, even though I'm not working, I haven't been working since March. I still get paid. I've still been getting paid that salary. I don't know when they're going to close that tap, but we'll find out. But there's some of my colleagues who only get paid per shift. And unfortunately for those colleagues of mine, the food basically has been taken from their table. So they haven't been working, they haven't been earning an income. And that's affected them quite greatly. I've got like WhatsApp groups with a couple of guys, and some guys are going through a little bit of a tough time. And then just to touch on what Julia was talking about in terms of like content that we should look at. So I follow a lot of stuff that happens on ESPN. I am a fan of a guy called Stephen A. Smith. So I follow him a lot on what he does. And they've been active the whole time throughout this lockdown. And I'm sitting there wondering, with so many stories that can be spoken about and comparing this player from this era and there's just so much content that you could have done, that we could have done, which we didn't. Unfortunately, I think that we sort of missed the boat in terms of that because over and above being a broadcaster, I'm also heavily involved in production in the background as well. So those are the sort of things that I'll be looking at in the very near future.
Vanessa Marie, Keagan's touched on something there around starting to plan for the future, life after soccer, life after sport, etc. In your life, you know, that you are essentially at that point where you're starting to kind of get involved in things that are outside of netball, etc. I mean, how has it been for you? And I suppose to what Keagan was talking about, how have you kind of felt you've been prepared for this time? Because obviously not being able to actively play would have had a much bigger impact if you didn't have anything else going.
Thank you, Abu, and I think a lot of you have got amazing points. I was going to retire officially with the last game, but I think that went. So I can talk to you from a personal point of view. I can talk to you from a general industry point of view, because yes, as you mentioned, I'm in a fortunate position to have played the sport, but also now been introduced into another industry, which is media. To be honest with you, I feel for the actively sporting heroes of today, because they need to look intrinsically for motivation, where I think in a team sport, and Dean, you guys can agree with me that you're quite externally motivated within a team environment. You always have a guy there motivating you, telling you to keep on going, where now for the past 3, 4, how many weeks you've been in isolation, you need to muster up that. And I think that challenges any sports person on an individual basis, and really look at your identity. Who are you without the team? Who are you without the hustle and the fame and all of that? Get back to the basics, because it comes down to your family, it comes down to your friends, it comes down to your raw talent and what you're going to do with your time. And all the nitty-gritty stuff kind of fades away. I think a lot of the sport you get kind of hyped up with a lot of other things that take your attention. And I think during this time, the good that it has brought, from what I've heard from all of the other players, it's kind of just brought everything kind of back to the bare essentials. There's nothing an Afrikaans tierlantynkie rig, it's just it's you, your talent and your time, and that's amazing to see.
Awesome, thank you very much for that. Marissa, just to get to you, you obviously are involved in kind of the marketing and the PR side of things. And just from that perspective, and kind of looking a little bit outside in, what are your thoughts on how the industry locally has reacted to this epidemic, in some of the things that you've seen?
So obviously my everything I do and look at is I always look back to the NCAA. I want to see what they're doing, just to bring it back to our university sports. But I also feel that the industry, our industry, has been so far behind in terms of content. And just to bring it back to Julia's point as well, that we have so many good stories that we could have told. And I'm not talking about the Springboks winning a World Cup. I'm not talking about Bafana winning an AFCON. I'm talking about, if you bring it back, Herschel Yankees. Great story. And for me, I'm kind of disappointed as well that we didn't get into that story when he started coming through the university ranks. And the industry itself has been almost pivoting too long, because I don't think the reality of the fact that, listen, here's a pandemic, it's not going to disappear in October. It's not going to just say, hey, I've had a great time, I'm going to chuck at the start of 2021, you guys can go on with your lives. It is really brought us to a point where we have to stop and really take stock of our products and what we are giving to market. Our fans are finally where we need them to be, online. They want something to watch, they need that content, and we're not giving it to them. And this is where I think our industry has failed our fans. We are not giving our consumer enough to look at, to really consume. Seabelo has his little glory winging it with Seabelo on IGTV, and people are interested. We need more of that content, and I feel that for the sports industry, for rights holders and for sponsors, in order to be relevant, we have to take charge and pull forward and say, you know what, that was the old world, we need a new world, and this is the new world that we are creating. Even if we don't know what we're doing, we are pushing forward to another in another direction, and we need to bring our fans with us, and they'll follow But now it's 2.5 months, and we are still sitting, and everybody's doing what they need to do, but nobody's really coming forth and starting a virtual Formula One race or starting a virtual NBA game. And we are still behind, and that is where I see our industry is, and me as well. I'm stuck. I'm so stuck, and I don't know how to unstuck myself from this, because I'm also pivoting and trying to figure out how am I going to move forward. And all these ideas are in my head, and that I'm trying to put onto paper. But it's like great ideas, but can it be commercialized, and can it be sold? So we are currently stuck in that thing, and I'm really hoping that people can come together and bring their ideas, and sponsors and other commercial partners can buy into new ideas that is totally different from what we've seen before.
You guys have mentioned, this thing around telling our stories and really kind of showcasing a lot of the things that we haven't in the past. Tulu, I mean, as someone who is very active on the ground, and I think also you've had a keen interest in sport for a long time, and I mean, some of these stories which aren't being told. From a fan point of view, I mean, what do you think is the opportunity that we're missing out on? We've seen the success, like we've said, of things like The Last Dance. We've seen the 30 for 30 documentaries, etc. Where should we be focusing on from a South African point of view in terms of like what's our version of that?
Hell of a question. So there is so much in South African sporting history that, unfortunately, if you look at what is available in the archives of South African sporting history, it is quite heavily skewed in the direction of historically white sports. And kudos to Kaunda and his team for a long time in the rugby space, who've made a serious effort to bring the history of Black rugby to the fore. I myself am heavily a rugby man, so that's the space I can speak with some significant comfort and confidence. When I took an invitational slide down to the Sevens in George a few years ago, Piedt was in that side as a 19-year-old, and we played against. I don't know if you remember, there was Kaiser Chiefs had a seventh side at that stage as well, and we played against them and a few of the provincial teams. I've been to every major rugby center in South Africa, I think, and other small towns. I've never been to a place that is more rugby mad than George. And most rugby people will not know that. Like, I was taken aback at how big a deal club rugby players are in that place. Kabamba Flores is a god in George. My goodness. Unless you actually go through and see what is going on in rugby in those communities, it would blow your mind. There's been a really massive opportunity missed in educating and entertaining people with some extraordinary South African stories. Even here in our backyard, most people think that Soweto is a football exclusive environment. So the oldest rugby club in Soweto is nearly 100 years old. It's extraordinary, almost as old as Joburg. So yeah, there's some really amazing stories that I would hope, given what Kaunda was saying, and being in being aware that these stories are being told, more of us would advocate for these stories being told.
We're operating in a sporting environment, so I think the default is always around the massive sports and the superstars, etc. But I think compelling stories are really just about human truths and human connections, which I think expands it so much further than what we would probably normally have a bias towards, which is rugby, your soccer, and your cricket. I mean, Vanessa, if I look at the growth of netball in this country over the last while, I'm sure there's so many amazing stories in there.
Definitely. And I think everybody knows a netball player. You play netball, you know someone who has played or had played at school. It's the biggest and most participated women's sport in this country. Yet there's only talk of cricket, rugby, soccer, where netball outweighs, there's more netball players in this country than rugby players. I don't know if you guys know that. And I think as a netball player who's come through the ranks, who's experienced most things, in this, in my career, I would love to be able to tell that story, not only just for other people to learn, but also to inspire the generation, not to only get caught up and just to enjoy the sport. But I mean, I can go for hours and hours on how amazing netball is. We have competed with the best in the world with nothing. We have worked. I remember some of our team motivators, like our coaches, Elise Kotze and them, we only focused on winning so that people back home can maybe read in a newspaper that netball had done something great. We didn't do it for the fame. We didn't have fame. We just did it because we love the sport and we wanted to make a difference, because we knew somewhere out there's a little girl whose dream is to play sport but can't. And I feel like in a women, when it comes to decision making for women now, especially with this COVID thing, a lot of the girls are contemplating, should I start a family? I'm a woman and I'd like to have a family. Is this the right time to start that? Should I hang up my netball shoes? But these girls they keep on going forever. So as women in sport, netball has the biggest story to tell by far. And I think it's a story that will shake you up, honestly. It's quite a story.
And then just in terms of South Africa sport in the context of the rest of the world, and kind of now looking forward, what do you think is going to be the impact for South African sport in the greater context of, I think, world sport? If I use just one example of what's happening down under, like with Super Rugby, and how Australasia trying to kind of close rank on their sport, and do you think we will come out of this stronger with greater opportunities, or do you think it's actually going to be harder for us to establish ourselves on the global stage now?
I think I might have a provoking thought that will kind of like lead us into something. As it is right now, I know rugby is in no correlation to what football is. When you take it up in a worldly sense, we're quite small in that regard, but we've kind of went back. If you talk about the industry as a whole, I'm looking at players getting contracted now. The Oaks are getting, amounts that people used to get in 2006, and that's just because of the knock of the whole industry. Like I say rugby is like a village, man. Rugby is like a village, and we have this chief, right? If the tribe of the chief is not doing well, then the whole village gets affected, and that's the industry we're in. And we kind of like went backwards compared to where the world is at. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for us to recover, because our whole community has suffered because now this chief has suffered.
I think cricket as well. I fully agree with Seabelo there that cricket is dominated by the Indians, and they control the world basically. So I think that cricket in South Africa has been a dying sport. Yes, it's still one of the top 3 sports in South Africa, but it has taken a knock since the whole dramas that we had in CSA a couple of months ago, where a financial knock was taken, and then we tried the whole MSL to try and get the state of cricket back into where it should be. But I don't think the caliber of our players will always make sure that cricket in South Africa will be at a certain point. The Rabadas and the rest of the clan. But it's important that the guys come out with a mindset of trying to make South African cricket better from a domestic front, because that's where the younger players are generated to play at a higher level. So I think it's going to be a testing time as soon as everything gets lifted and tours get to start again.
I think that going forward, things won't necessarily get better. Seabelo has already mentioned that guys are getting smaller contracts, which I think is a tragedy, especially in South Africa when you think about the fact that we are competing with the European market and the Japanese market and so on. Now, ultimately, the issue will be that the consumer of the sport, so people that are watching TV, they have been retrenched at their workplaces. They now have to not only focus on watching DSTV, which comes at a price. They want to go now and rather watch Netflix or Amazon or whatever. And ultimately, that will affect the bottom line when it comes to sports that are specifically getting funded by this broadcaster or DSTV or SuperSport or whatever. The bottom line will always be affected. So from a rugby point of view, I'm not going to speak on behalf of other sports, but from a rugby point of view, I think that they're going to really have to relook at the whole structure. I think the possibility of us only having 6 professional senior rugby teams in South Africa is probably going to have to be looked at. And all the smaller unions where like a Griffins and a Falcons and Bolland and whatever, which has a senior men's side, which is basically semi-professional, they're probably going to have to can those teams. And only in the smaller unions, only focus on the amateur side. So that's women's rugby, that's schools, that's clubs, that's refereeing. They're probably going to have to streamline the whole model because of the knock that they've taken because of this COVID. So a lot of things are going to change in rugby, and it's going to affect the bottom line. It's also going to affect all the way up to the broadcasters as well.
True. And Marissa, from a marketing point of view, I mean, what is, if we start to look at, the impact on from brands and obviously in terms of supporting the industry, but also, I mean, we are at the stage where sportsmen are professionalizing themselves and becoming brands themselves. And a lot of these salaries that these clubs are able to pay at a global level is because of the support that they're also able to get out of brands. I mean, what impact do you think the brand side is going to have on this?
So from a commercial point of view, I do feel that a lot of commercial contracts will have to change. A lot of the whole structure around commercialization of any property that will have to be looked at. Because of no live sports, it means the sponsors are not getting the media rights that they signed up for. So it's the whole domino effect with everything. Athletes are in a prime position to become brands. If we look at Michael Jordan, again, Michael Jordan was a brand and he was loyal to the Bulls, but people, Nike wanted to be attached to him, obviously before they made it big, but brands wanted to be attached to him because of the type of person he was, the player he was, etc. So for athletes, build your brand, but don't look at just money because we're all struggling. So yeah, marketing and PR and all of that will change a hell of a lot in the coming months, and as well as commercial rights and contracts.
What do you think is the key shift in focus that the industry needs to make coming out of this crisis? We've spoken, from various perspectives in terms of how this has impacted players, how this has impacted broadcasters, how this has impacted fans. Looking at that and saying, cool, we're going into this new normal. What are the most important things that we need to be changing or catching up with to ensure the longevity of our industry? This
is something I feel really passionate about, and I know Netball South Africa is working really hard to keep the interaction between players, fans, management, coaches really intact. I don't know if you've seen there on their social media pages, but I know Lindiwe Dube, also from SuperSport, she's constantly doing interviews and keeping the fans fed that need that netball, even though there's no games, but have trivia, in this time, I think they did really well. But going forward, to keep that pace, and then the reintroduction of the games just added on will create lifelong commitment from either all the ends, from the players, from the fans, from the sponsors, because no sponsors has pulled out of netball either, because they are keeping them fed and they're keeping them going and giving them what they need at this point. So I feel it's like a joint venture for everyone to interact. I think that going forward, yeah.
We've talked around it, but we haven't talked about the fact that there'll be no fans in stadiums until there's a vaccine. That's just it. Sport as we know it, cricket, rugby, football, Formula One, anything is going to have a big chunk of its essence removed because there'll be no fans. The other thing we're going to have to get used to is that money has been lost. The Premier League, for example, is going to lose 300 to 350 million pounds, I think, per club, because it cannot have the broadcast the way it was meant to be. I don't know yet what the effect will be in South Africa and how we're going to work things out, but that is why we're pushing to finish the leagues, because we have to. There's been financial obligations, there are huge implications. One thing I think it will have a huge knock-on effect is the transfer window, especially in football. Are players going to be sold for the ridiculous amounts that we've been seeing lately, or is there just not enough money anymore? Are sponsors going to cut back? We already saw the ABSA Premiership today is not going to be the ABSA Premiership from next season. ABSA are pulling the plug on their sponsorship. Are we going to have more money put into TV commercials because that's how people can watch sport now? It's there's so many things to think about, and so many things that are going to become clear later on once we actually do commence with sport behind closed doors in South Africa. But I think the biggest point for me is about the fans and the soul of sport.
I was going to make, my point was preempted a little bit, that the absence of fans is particularly devastating for the Kwijo squad, because what are we if not supporting at the stadium? We've been looking forward to the All Blacks coming back for the first time in 2 years, because they didn't come through last year in a truncated rugby championship. That's now obviously out the window. We were looking forward to the Lions series next year, and if it is as Julia says that there will be no live sport until there's a vaccine, would the British and Irish Lions travel to South Africa if there are going to be no fans in the stadium? Like, it's a really difficult, it's a difficult thing to fathom.
And then the final point I think that I just wanted to hear from you guys is, knowing all that we know now and all that we've seen in terms of, the best practices, the learnings that we've taken, the sacrifices, and I guess from your guys, either from a personal point of view or from the companies or the teams that you represent, what do you think you could have done, or your teams or your companies could have done differently to better prepare for this crisis? Is there anything we could have done to better prepare for it?
We speaking about stories and stuff like that. So I just wanted to mention that in the platform that I was given at work, we actually did focus a lot on stories. We actually did focus a lot on grassroots. And like, we've been doing these stories. It's just that the unfortunate part is when the pandemic hit, it sort of, cut us short. Obviously, you try and do as much as you can with the limited amount of time that you have, but it cut us short, and it was very unfortunate. I think, as a person who's also involved behind the scene with production as well, another big issue is sponsors that have put money in for the year saying, listen, we've paid for this amount of shows, we've paid for this amount of exposure in these areas, etc., etc. They're not getting what they paid for. So that's a huge issue. But what could we have done differently? I think that production as a whole, there needs to be almost like a production hub, like just a people set aside that specifically look at doing stories. We spoke about, Vanessa spoke about netball. The general public that watches sport on TV don't even know the former netball stars, the Proteas, Abo Simniki, Venice, all of them. We don't even know them well enough. I mean, each lady has got a story to tell. So, I mean, I think that if every production house or company could actually have a group of production people that only focus on those documentaries. So along the line, maybe in 2 years' time or whatever, we can also have a 30 for 30. We can also have 30 documentaries that are ready, good to go. So if we fall into something like this again, we just roll them out and keep people entertained, all the way from netball to rugby to cricket to athletics to cross country to water polo, everything. So I think that those are the sort of things from a production point of view that we can probably do different.
I've really been surprised by the silence from the likes of Athletics SA. I mean, what a golden opportunity! If there is a sport that is going to come out first and be able to be competitive and be out there, athletics would be it. There are countless missed opportunities, and I suppose I'm diverting a little from what could have been done to what possibly should be done right now. There is a great deal that is going to force sporting bodies to think outside the box. Kaunda mentioned the likes of Stephen A. Smith and them, and the way that the Americans have been presenting sports. If you follow American football, basketball, even though there's been no live sports, you've been at no loss of content to consume, and yet we still are so dependent on the need to have live sports on our televisions in order to consume anything. And it's going to force some serious rethinks, and hopefully when things normalize again, we will get generally better products.
What I wanted to say was, except for the regrets that some people would experience how to utilize this time, I know of some of the teams and some of the players that would have wanted a better home gym setup. For instance, I know a lot of them are struggling to get the home gym and get working from home and making that more of a personal experience. I know a lot of the players wish that they had built their brands better, and now they have to be building a brand during a pandemic. But I just hope that whatever lessons have been learned, that we can put it all together and learn this lesson during this time, because the unknown is the biggest fear of everyone, and nobody can prepare you for what the unknown holds. But I do believe that for the future, hopefully in generations to come, there'll be a little COVID-19 booklet that our children's children can learn from, and there will be growth in the sports, growth in media, growth. I hope and pray that will be the case.
One of my biggest regrets is that I'm not a gamer, and I wish I was into esports, because I feel that is it's a flourishing industry, and coming up with a game where I could reinvent contact sport like they did with the NBA. But also, one of my big lessons and hopes for the future is that a lot more collaborations happen between different types of industries and people. So if you look at where sport is on the government's radar, sport is not high up. If you look at budget, when Mr. Tito does his budget, sport is not high up. We have to look after health, we have to look after housing, all of these other, everything, and then year 8th, 9th, maybe 10th is sport. And the people keeping sport alive is us, as the people in the industry. It's the athletes, it's the coaches. We are keeping sports alive, and we are bringing that hope back. And just taking it back to October last year when we won the World Cup, the elation, or was it November? The months are the same to me. But there was such an elation in the country. For a week, this country was beyond everything. It was like we all loved each other. Everyone was happy-go-lucky. And this is what we can achieve through collaborations, through, like we say, the storytelling, and just being a little bit more open to ideas from others, and just inviting more people into your conversation.
I've always wondered, and I'm going to pick on Seabelo again because he happens to be here. I've long been of the opinion that eventually rugby sevens will become a bigger sport than 15 because it's Olympic. It's more countries take it seriously. Eventually, globally, it'll become a bigger sport. And we spoke a little earlier about the opportunities for athletes to become brands and start to really sweat their brand equity. So when guys who are exceptional at 7 get an opportunity at 15, they opt for it. And I've always wondered, man, is there not a way that through really focusing on the brands, because we're not gassing him up, but Seabelo could really be one of the biggest sevens rugby brands in the world. And would there not have been an opportunity, if assuming he prefers 7, if he committed to 7, to then use the global reach of sevens and the fact that he is at the very, very top of that sport to make up for what would be a financial shortfall in salary by sweating the brand.
So basically you're asking, as a sevens player, how he could get that 15s money without playing 15s. So I would say, get a very, very good publicist. I'm not the manager, not the agent, because I find a lot of agents are in it for, I won't say wrong reasons, but they're in it for their own pockets. A lot of them are coming from families who have agent blood in them. But there are very good publicists and young people coming up that have contacts, that are well known in a corporate situation, that have that passion for a sport, that can really change your brand and connect you with the right people. So yeah, get yourself a good publicist and work hard, because that money will then come afterwards.
Where I think I'd love to see, and I mean, and different sportsmen do it better than others, but sportsmen taking control of the platform they have through technology. And what are you doing to create content, to tell stories, to build your own brand through the digital platforms that you have? And I'm not seeing a lot of that. I mean, I think Seabelo is probably not the right example because, we've got a winemaker here amongst us. So he's definitely kind of doing his part. And I think Keagan also touched on it in terms of people choosing to study, etc. There's such an opportunity, I think, for people to take more control, I think, of those platforms, and start to tell other stories, because you can imagine just the other types of passions that sportsmen have. Like, just because you're a rugby player, rugby is not all that you're into. I'm sure there's some budding chefs amongst sportsmen. There's people who are good with their hands. There's people who are talented in so many other ways that could make for very interesting stories. And if I look at other entertainers, like a Jay Something and what he's been able to do with Something's Cooking, which is build a completely different brand to his music career, that he's now working with other brands that are, completely unrelated to his normal 9-to-5. And I somehow think that there's not enough coming out of sportsmen in terms of that leveraging.
I feel the same way. And as you said earlier, I think I'm a little bit of a bad example because I'm currently in works of doing all of this. Marisa, what you talked about earlier as well, that's quite important. And I'm one of the few that have seen this opportunity, but it's the new wave, right? It's not going to happen in masses now. It's going to start off slow. But once that starts rolling, I think it's going to take over, because imagine a player telling his story the way he wants to tell his story. not scripted or anything like that. That's something that's so powerful. And with that power, you can move in the direction that you want to move because you control the narrative.
I mean, we're putting it on, you know, at the foot of athletes, but the referee as a sport. I mean, for a long time, I racked my brain at how it is that netball is the second highest, the second biggest sport of basketball by participation, and yet, I mean, we have quiz nights and people have no idea who Bongi Msomi is, right? Which is bizarre. Right? She is the national captain of the second most played sport in the country.
I think I was maybe the most unpopular player just because I was the one who voiced my opinion and I gave and Simi Mdaka, she's one of them. We were a couple of players that really stood up for that specifically. And I'm still doing that and I'm still fighting this battle because I want the players. I mean, the story is just Bongi Nsomi's story. She's the captain now, but you guys don't understand that women ran with bricks in the streets to keep fit. She lived in a shack. She's literally, if you hear that story, it's unbelievable. So all those stories I want to be told, but we were really restricted because our image rights were not our own. So we could not tell our story the way we wanted to. So